broadcast network, AfterBuzz TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your number one source for after-show entertainment. AfterBuzz TV, the destination for TV superfans, producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows, interviewing celebrities and showrunners, and bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
What's up, everybody? Welcome to AfterBuzz TV, 30 for 30 Rand University After Show. I am your host tonight, Ben Bateman, joined by my lovely co-hosts Kevin, John, and Steph Z.
What's up?
I would say what's
like
I couldn't hit that high
dying
note.
Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Is it Dying Pac-Man?
That's what I just
So
said. It's okay.
That's what this one was all about, guys. Dying Pac-Man.
Yep. Yeah.
No, just kidding. This was about Randy Moss and his youthful years. In West Virginia. So this was a pretty fantastic 30 for 30. I have to say, I kind of feel like every time I watch one of these, I'm like, this was the best one ever.
I feel like maybe you've said that once or twice before.
Yeah. Well, and here's my theory. The reason is this. It's because these movies inevitably focus on great sports stories. That's what makes them great.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we love
I don't
sports.
think that the quality of the movie is actually as important as we think. I think it's just the quality of the story. Now, sometimes I've seen a few that are like not great, where I've been like a little bit turned off, and I've seen a few where I've been like so engaged. But I'll give you a great example. 4 Days in October is probably my favorite one to date. I watched it again last week. As a movie, it's just okay. It's actually not that good of a movie, but the story is the best story ever. Yeah. So I get sucked in every single time.
Yeah.
This was truly a great movie, I thought. I was like almost at like verge of tears a couple times in this one.
Wow. Well, for me, I was not crying throughout it, but I was emotional as far as happy. And you know, part of the reason is because Randy Moss is really my favorite. Top 5 favorite athletes of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already discussed on other shows, you know, his unprecedented athletic ability.
Right.
You know, we've had other NFL players talk about his ridiculous athletic ability. So I followed Randy Moss ever since he was a rookie. And so I was really excited to watch this.
Yeah.
Story side alone, just because of Randy Moss and the fact that they did such a good job with the story and a great job of telling everything that happened in an unbiased way just totally made me all the more a fan of it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm with you, Ben. I for sure got choked up a couple times.
Yeah.
And I kind of love Randy Moss now. I used to love him because he was a great athlete. Now seeing the person he is.
Yeah.
And I have to say, he kind of got dealt a crappy hand.
Yeah, big time.
And I feel like he was made to be an example, and he got treated very unfairly. And I didn't know the in-depth. Like, you heard some of the stuff, and I actually heard somebody talking about some of this stuff in regards to Jameis Winston with the draft. So it's very current, a lot of this stuff that's coming up in players' past and baggage. But I never really knew his whole story in depth until after watching this, and I feel like he kind of got the short end of the stick.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with Growing Up in Rand, where the movie takes place. The first maybe 15 minutes of it takes place in Rand, West Virginia. Now, you've all watched the movie, I'm assuming, so you know it's this tiny, tiny town. There's no town government. There's one store, and Rand University is this 7-Eleven that basically a bunch of former star athletes go and stand around drinking 40s and playing craps as they show. It's just they stand around and they don't go to college, and that's life. And it's a way of life. And as we've seen in many third world countries and parts of the world, I mean, life is exactly what's in front of you. So not everybody has the opportunity to go to a premier college and go have a wonderful career. That's just not life. So that's life in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And
it's like they don't even know anything different. They're okay with that being life.
Well, I think part of it is because that's just the bubble that they're in.
Right.
And to them, it's like this whole outside world doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's like, well, that's foreign. You know, we can't go. It's like traveling to space or something, getting out of that. And, fortunately, because of his athletic ability, Randy was able to get out of that. But go ahead.
What I was going to say is the parallel that I immediately draw is Allen Iverson. That's so that when you think about this story, you think about 1996, 1997. Obviously, one's Virginia, one's West Virginia. They're not exactly the same, but it's the same part of the world largely. It's the same general. They both had incredibly difficult upbringings. They were both sort of pound for pound arguably one of the best 5 or 10 athletes of the 90s or ever. I mean, some people have said that
Right.
Iverson's the best pound for pound athlete to ever play basketball. Some people have said the same thing. Kenny Clark from the Vikings was on Branded Athlete with us,
Yeah.
said Moss was the best athlete that he's ever seen.
Yeah.
Burleson, when he had him on the show, said he is the best player he's ever played with. I mean, it's people say things about Randy Moss's athletic ability. He was sort of one of a kind.
Yeah. The fact that Kenny Clark even said Randy, if he wanted to, could have gone to the NBA, just, attest to the serious athleticism that he was blessed with. Kind of like Allen Iverson, who was a standout football player when he was in high school.
So now, a really interesting thing is that Iverson has his own 30 for 30. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this one, No Crossover. Steve James directed it. Guy who directed Hoop Dreams. And it's about Iverson in high school. It's a very similar story. He gets in trouble at a bowling alley, allegedly throwing a chair at a white kid.
Yeah.
The kid goes into the hospital. Iverson gets locked up. And I believe the governor, it was a little more complicated, but a person in power had to petition to get the city to stand behind him to get him out of jail. It's a very similar story. And
Right.
they both, we've talked about this, Kevin and I, a couple times. And actually, we talked about it last week on the episode we did talking about Sonny Vaccaro. But the concept of the Garnett, Kobe, Iverson era in the NBA, it's kind of representative of just the whole era of sports in the 90s. It's these athletes who were sort of chastised, like white America and culture hadn't really caught up to where we are now. It's not the same, right? It was social media didn't exist. Not everybody had a voice. So those two are so representative of their time. These incredible transcendent athletes that were kind of chastised and treated poorly by the world at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put Kobe in that category.
No, but in terms of the attitude.
But yeah, and one thing particularly with as far as parallelisms between Iverson and Moss is the fact that there was so much racial tension within their communities, within their schools, that kind of led to their altercations and subsequent, charges and sentences. And, I thought that was very interesting how, race, obviously, which is still a prevalent issue now with all this going on, but even 20 years ago when they were at the pinnacles of their careers in high school, how still prevalent it was, and the fact that they both got in similar conflicts because of racial instances.
It seems that the major difference between then and now in terms of our culture is that now mass America is willing to essentially criticize like sort of the white power, excessive force, targeting of black individuals. That's like, there's an enormous amount of awareness now. My Facebook feed, my Twitter feed blows up constantly with, there's a problem in our country that has to change. And this is white people posting this all the time. Yeah. In the 90s, when you have things like this happening, you see the kids interviewed when Moss is getting in trouble. It's like, you can see it in their eyes. It's this ignorance. It's this total ignorance.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
I agree with you. There's no awareness.
Complete lack of awareness.
Yeah, no. And I mean, nowadays, I have to say, I think, and I would hope to think that if you take Randy Moss and you put him in high school tomorrow in the same situation, his life plays out completely different.
Totally. Star athletes are treated in a different way. Yeah. I mean, then again,
I kind of disagree with that a little bit because
maybe.
You still are going to have people like Jameis Winston's, who are these star athletes.
I'm saying, right, but his first fight that took him left was a fight because of a white kid wrote something on a desk. Like, that stuff would not go down the same way now.
See, I don't know, because in the South,
I don't think so. Because I was about to say, I went to school in the South, and and this was in the mid 2000s, and there was a lot of racism that was still highly prevalent.
But I feel like I'm not saying there's not racism, but I'm saying that if something happened, he wouldn't just be pinpointed. Like, they would have looked into
there would be accountability for both sides.
There would have been both. Like, the white kid that said the racial slur on the desk got no punishment, what it seemed like. And nowadays, I feel like instead of him getting 100% of the punishment, maybe the punishment still might have been like 60-40.
Absolutely.
But it would have been less on him, which might not have made him not get his Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like, it would have played out slightly different, I think.
But
100% agree.
At the same time, and this will sort of speak to the next section of the documentary, which is sort of race and DuPont, Redneck Alley, that whole thing. I mean, DuPont wasn't far from Rand, obviously, if they were going to school there.
Right.
So there's the Rand resident whose name is Bobby Jones, maybe, because Bobby was his teammate. The guy who speaks a lot in the documentary, and there's the one scene where he says, "There's another 30-point scorer, 20 touchdown kid coming up." And he's gonna, unfortunately, 4 or 5 years from now, he's gonna be out here drinking a beer with me. And it's the one time that you hear the narrator step in and say, why is that? Can you tell me why that is? And he said, man, if I knew how to change it, I'd do something about it.
So he's saying that essentially these kids are destined or doomed to fall back into the lifestyle,
Which
or
speaks
the trap.
against the point that things have changed so much, because this documentary was made this year.
Well, no, and
Right,
I'm
but I
not
think
saying
it
that
was in
things are changing.
retrospect.
I do think to a certain extent, yeah, you can go across a lot of places like Rand in the South or in the Northeast or in Middle America where it's still the same kind of thing. Well, these kind of things
Right, but
are
I'm trying
still.
to say there's less. Like, the NFL or the NCAA would have got involved differently, I believe, in nowadays than just saying, like, okay, you're not coming to Notre Dame.
Yeah, no.
And I feel like West Virginia, I mean, is one of the, I mean, I would say top 5 most ignorant places, and I'm sure I'm going to get hate for this, but like ignorant when it comes to there's not a lot of diversity there. There's way more racism. Like West Virginia, there's all the jokes about it. You know what I mean? I feel like that is a place that might even be worse than like a North Carolina or a South. Like, even though they're not the true South, it's a place that's known to be not diverse. And again, I'm sure there's people from there that are very intelligent. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, but I feel like, the NCAA would hear about this now, and across the board, there'd be a lot more people that would support a different outcome.
Well, yeah, I mean, historically, if you look back, I know Virginia's not technically the South, but historically, if you look back,
But
post-Civil
Virginia and
War,
West Virginia are
there was the
very
Confederacy, and that's why during the Confederacy, that's why they segregated and split the state up,
Right.
Into 2 different places, because you had the Confederate side, the Union side, and that's why there's still a lot of racism there. I'm sure they probably still have Confederate flags there, but to say
They have the rebel flags everywhere, yeah.
yeah, but to say but to what you were saying, I do agree that the NCAA would probably have did something, but still, you still see it now. Whenever a player has any kind of off-field issue, whether pending criminal charges or things of that sort, teams will not won't even double
What are you
check.
talking about? James Winston went first in the draft.
Yeah, he had controversy.
Okay,
I
but
mean,
look,
he's got
but
so
that's because
much
he was
controversy.
exonerated of that. Look at the other guy who was undrafted and then ended up going to the Cowboys.
Lionel Collins?
Lionel Collins,
Yeah.
who no one was touching him.
Lionel Collins.
Lionel Collins. No one touched him.
Not Lionel Hollins. That's a coach in the NBA.
Lionel Richie, Lionel Collins, whoever.
Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown. Who actually that would have been a good pick. I'm shocked he didn't get drafted. But the fact that nobody touched him until he was freed of the charges. So I think that's still.
I also think it's a caliber of athlete, because they did touch. Even if Jameis Winston wasn't exonerated before the draft, they still would have picked him.
Yeah.
Number 1, 100%, they still would have picked him
yeah.
because his talent supersedes what the possible outcome could be. Or I do think it'd be a little different.
I see what you're saying. I don't know. Yeah.
So, all right.
It could go. Yeah. I hear
sure.
you.
Moving on.
It is super interesting looking at this part of the world in those times, because just a few years later, Michael Vick came out of West Virginia as well.
Right.
I mean, what is it about that area of the world that produces such insane? I mean, we're talking about these 3 guys: Vick, Iverson,
It's in the water, man.
and Moss. This is I would argue 3 of the 20 greatest athletes, just on pure athletic ability.
Pure athletic ability.
Pure
yeah.
athletic ability in the history of sports.
Well, because they don't have anything else to do there.
But I mean, that's. Yeah.
Dude, they have Rand University to
Right,
chill.
but what I'm saying is they have talent is talent, and I believe this. And you guys might disagree with this, but you either have it or you don't for most of these athletes. So, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of people that have it but never really tweak it to, like, they never perfect it to the way it could be. So these guys all had it, and they just had nothing else really. So internally, these guys, or subconsciously, these guys are more aware than their surroundings, knowing that this is the only shot they got to be good at this to get out of here.
Well, Michael Jordan always would say, luck is the combination of preparation and opportunity. I think it's the intersection of preparation and opportunity, right?
Yeah.
That's the phrase.
Yeah.
Singleton, his friend, not Mike Jordan.
Bob Hope said that too.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And Oprah.
All right. Fair enough.
And Stepsy.
and Kevin John.
And
So.
Ben Bateman.
So.
Give it back to you.
We see Moss growing up with Sam Singleton Jr., his friend.
Right.
They're his surrogate father, Sam Singleton Sr., who insisted they were on the same team. And Singleton's the most tragic character in the doc. He's the guy that makes you almost cry at the end, and just sort of throughout when they're talking to him. But he says he had an opportunity. He had his opportunity to go play
Right. baseball,
but he didn't have the preparation because he got himself in trouble with drugs.
Right.
And that's that's really what this comes down to, is that you can say it in almost any industry, whether you're talking about being a successful actor or an athlete. For the most part, what separates the great from the just good, or the super successful from the just moderately successful that give up, is the head on your shoulders ability to stick with it and attack the problem in an economical way, in an efficient way, and not get derailed.
And you know, kind of to go off of that point, you know, with Randy specifically, you know, it's funny you say that, you know, these particular individuals are so focused they have no other way, because I personally feel that Randy never lived up to his potential. As a college player, as an NFL player, I believe that Randy Moss is the most gifted, talented wide receiver in the history of the game by a long shot.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why he shouldn't be number one in every bit of that record book.
Why do you
and I think unanimously,
he's pretty close.
I think the consensus, well, of course, I think the consensus is that he did never live up to his full potential in the NFL.
Well, we were talking to Kenny Clark the other day, and what were we saying? If you gave Moss, if he played the traditional route, and he had played, you know, his years in college, he had gone to a major team, and he had gone with an earlier pick.
No drama, you mean?
No drama.
Yeah.
He plays the 2 seasons with the Raiders that he just pretty much throws away are
Those were throwaway
good
seasons.
with a good team. Maybe he goes to the Patriots earlier, and then he ends up at the end of his career, instead of those final couple years where he just lost interest.
Yeah.
You know, if he had played for, like, say, the Niners, or I mean, not the Niners, because they wouldn't have thrown him touchdowns, but
yeah, they probably would have. You know, they were known for that.
if he had gone to a team.
The year he was with the Niners, they went to the Super Bowl that year. That was 2012. Ben, thanks. The Seahawks didn't make it that year. Go ahead.
If he had gone to a team that was, you know, throwing touchdowns, not running for
my
touchdowns,
God.
and he had done the whole thing, I think you're probably right. Jerry Rice played till 40. So, you know.
Well,
But then again, with Jerry, go ahead.
Time out. Why do you think that? Do you think because in his head he got derailed, so his confidence wasn't there? Like, what do you think it was? Because it's clear that there's the talent, and it's clear that, you know, I feel like, and you hear this so much with great athletes, it's not how high you go, it's how high you bounce. And he bounced, like, he bounced back, but was it because he had to go that down? Like, why do you think he couldn't?
I think part of it was this. When you compare Rice and Moss, which is a good comparison because they're like 1 and 2 in every statistical record wide receiver wise.
T.O. dancing through most of the categories.
With T.O. dancing through there and twerking, whatever he does. But the thing is, first of all, you have to look at Rice. Look at the first 2 quarterbacks Rice had for the first, 16 seasons of his life, 15 seasons. Joe Montana, Steve Young.
Yep.
And I think if you put Randy Moss in that situation to where the first 12, 13, I don't know how many seasons.
So you think it's supporting cast?
I honestly, because I think honestly with Randy Moss, first of all, his first few years in the Vikings, they went through Cunningham, Culpepper, Jeff George, a lot of different quarterbacks.
Right.
And even when he went to Oakland, who
Rich Gannon or something?
Yeah.
Well, Rich Gannon was there towards the, because Jerry Rice played with Rich Gannon in 2002. But at any rate, I honestly think it was just lack of consistency with a great quarterback to throw to him all the time. And I think if he did have that stability like a Rice had for the first 10 years, I think he would have been fired up and motivated and probably would have won everything. But I think just the lack of that and his seasons on the Raiders just kind of drained him to the point where he just lost.
But he also had a really bad attitude on the Raiders, and when the deal went through, and we should get back to the doc in a second. But when the deal went through, when the deal went through, and the Patriots traded for Moss, they traded I think a low level pick for him. Yeah. And at the time, the Raiders coach had said he's an aging player with declining talents. Right. And Belichick was like, okay, sure, I'll take your aging player with declining talents, and then proceeds to set the single season touchdown record the next season.
Thrashed it.
Yeah, catches his 22nd or 23rd touchdown on the same pass that Brady throws his 50th touchdown. Like the most insane sports thing that's ever happened. Right. Like I don't know why that doesn't get talked about more. They both broke their respective records on the same touchdown.
Because Peyton Manning all but obliterated that a few seasons later.
Yeah. And I guess Brady had just broken Manning's record.
So imagine if Brady and Moss were together.
In 04. Yeah, 04 forward instead of 07 forward.
Exactly.
Just replaced the Raiders seasons. Yeah, it's quite possible he'd be.
Seriously.
Right, but so getting back to the doc, you're saying that none of this stuff that happened off the field, you don't think that pertains. You think it's directly to what team he was on, what quarterback he had, what supporting cast
Absolutely.
he had. Absolutely.
Because I just to make the parallel to Allen Iverson, I think he was the same thing. I don't personally think he lived up to his potential in the NBA. And part of that was because he was always frustrated in the NBA. He didn't have a winning franchise around him. Had he won numerous championships, I think you would have seen a whole nother Allen Iverson towards the end of his career.
But that just enters into the conversation of how do you judge athletes? Do you judge them strictly off of championships, off of statistics, off of long-term productivity?
I'm not talking about judging the athlete.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, why you look at a player like Moss or a player like Iverson.
Right, but in the same sense, if you're a true winner and you're that good, the people around you, it brings them up to you. So,
don't forget, LeBron had to switch teams in order to win championships.
I was just going to say that. I mean,
I don't know.
He just maybe didn't. That was his, ceiling.
So he ends up losing his scholarships after Notre Dame. He gets the Notre Dame scholarship with, I think Florida State was second. Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Florida State.
Which was, I'm so sorry, to put him in solidarity for 7 days for smoking a joint. Are you serious?
Oh, you mean solitary?
Solitary, sorry. You know what I meant. But for 7 days?
Yeah. Wasn't he already on parole?
Yeah, he was on probation.
Still, he smoked a joint.
It's so sad. And you watch that video of him apologizing to the coach and the other players, the one that they say that he never showed. I mean, I'm with you, Steph. I already love Randy Moss. Call me a front runner. I've always been a guy that likes the really good players and the great teams.
Yeah.
But I just found myself when I was watching this just liking Moss so much more, just more and more and more.
Is that all?
Yeah, I mean, he just sort of all the footage of him as a kid, and then the way he talked about it, and how kind of well spoken he was,
and the way he talked about his mom.
Yeah, and the slang.
The NCAA gives me 5, but my mom only said 3.
And he says, my mom gave me a call, and she said, "You're not the only Moss."
Yeah.
And he's like, "That was it. That's all I needed to hear." I just love the guy. I was really like.
And I think that right there also is ingredients for what allowed him to get out of Rand.
Yeah.
The talent, knowing subconsciously that maybe he can use this talent to get out, and then he had that in him from his mom. He had that intuition of what's right and what's wrong.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in there. He's a kid, and they all try and do, I get that.
I did think it was interesting that in the doc they don't make reference to Iverson, just because it was so close.
Well, probably because they already did one about him.
Yeah, they probably didn't want to take the...
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. But so he gets the scholarships revoked. He ends up at Marshall.
Right.
And that's the Moss that most people in the national consciousness really started to get to know was Randy Moss at Marshall. But even then, they were Division I AA in his first season there.
Right.
It's interesting that this documentary focuses entirely on the pre-NFL Randy Moss, which I'm sure was the point. It's the Moss people don't know.
Because we know history post-98.
Yeah.
But
that one play they show, the one where he hurdles the guy.
Yeah,
and
it should have been called.
And Pennington's talking about it, and it's just it just shows that the level of athleticism, right? The number of guys you can think of that are capable of doing something like that.
Yeah.
It's just sort of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Right? I love the story of how they would play with straights when they were a kid. You could forward lateral. Razzle-dazzle. That's right. And you would get 4 or 5 straight.
Right.
I think maybe that was the most heartbreaking part of the story, was the stories from his teammates growing up in Rand, and how how much fun they had, and how and the pictures and everything, just as kids, the idea of playing with somebody who had that athletic ability at 15, at 16.
And it's funny, when you watched his high school videos that they'd showed, it was funny because he looked so much bigger.
Much bigger.
He looked like this massive, Sasquatch running down the field compared to everybody else, which is funny because he was skinny, but he was just so tall.
Yeah.
And just huge. He had the biggest pads.
I was going to say the pads. It was so funny to see the difference of equipment.
He could barely, I was like, how did he have all that athleticism? Because I know by playing football with shoulder pads, with especially that big, you don't have the athleticism to move your hands up, to go out here and do stuff.
Right.
So the fact that he was able to do all that while looking like this big...
Are you saying you played football, Kev?
Star receiver, North California, Bear Creek High School, Google me.
Here's the extra point kicker.
Okay, so I was the backup place kicker, but still.
Kevin was the equipment manager.
Back to Rand University.
For the women's team in Stockton.
That's right. Ben was also the cheerleader, so we'll get to that later. We'll show some footage of that.
So he's at Marshall. He goes for he wins the Bolitnikov. Is that how you pronounce it?
Bolitnikov, yeah.
For the outstanding receiver.
Fred Bolitnikov, yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting, the stuff about the Heisman voting that year. It's funny because 3 of the 4 guys up for the Heisman that year are legends.
Woodson,
first
Manning,
Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
Manning, Woodson, Moss, and then you have Ryan Leaf.
Right.
Yeah.
Ryan Leaf, who is the infamous draft bust.
He's in jail right now too. He's incarcerated.
So here's the most ironic part of the whole thing. You have two black guys and two white guys, both nominated for the Heisman in 1998, right? Yeah. Moss is the trouble guy. He's the guy that everybody thinks has an issue with, and he's got the sunglasses on. Woodson, who was just insanely dynamic at Michigan.
He was just a freak.
You have the two best quarterbacks, right? The two All-American white guys, square guys, and Peyton and Leaf. Now, it's ironic to me that of the two guys, if the one guy that would end up in jail is one of the square-jawed white guys that goes as a quarterback. The guy that was maybe supposed to be taking over Peyton Manning, the guy that everybody
exactly. There was that one too.
It was this close.
It was
He's one of the biggest busts.
And the guy that ends up in jail is Ryan Leaf. Yeah. And Randy Moss is a record setter who's speaking incredibly eloquently in this documentary.
Going back to do football camps with kids.
Yeah, it's just awesome. Jail. So he goes to the NFL 21st, right? Goes to the Vikings, and you have to ask yourself, there's a phenomenon that happens sometimes, right, with great football players, where if you have the chip on your shoulder, if you drop in the draft, you seem to have a better career. Now the stories are littered with top 10 picks that turned out, but the stories are also littered with guys that were taken outside of the top 15, top 20, or even dropped into the second round. I'm gonna give you three names right now.
Tom Brady,
Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Jerry Rice. Not one of those guys was taken in the top 15. 16, 21, and in the third round for Terrell Owens.
For T.O., yeah.
At least the three most productive receivers of all time, and in most people's eyes, the three greatest receivers of all time. The other guys that you can start talking about are like Calvin Johnson, Chris Carter, maybe Lynn Swann. I mean,
you got Don from the Packers that broke every record back then. Don.
I mean, there's a list. I'm not going to make the list now because there's.
Is it Hudson or something? Go ahead.
You'd have to give a lot of respect to a lot of people, but the bottom line is the three guys that come up most frequently in conversation are those three names.
Yeah.
And not one of those guys was a top 15 draft pick. That right there should be proof of the theory.
Look at the colleges, first of all, that Rice went to, Mississippi Valley State. Look at the college T.O. went to, Chattanooga. What was it? Something or other.
Marshall.
And then Marshall. So it's not like they were coming out of Florida State, USC, the Hurricanes, Miami, these top coveted programs. They were all coming from.
Well, you got to think about it too. It's also like the peaking of athletes. Like some athletes peak early and they go early and then they suck. And some of them, you wait and they build and build and build and then they peak at the right time, which is the best time. Like if I was an athlete, I'd rather go as a lower pick and a higher pick, later in the draft and be successful in the pro sport rather than be like awesome in college and the person and then suck it.
Yeah, I mean, look at Sherman and Wilson. Seahawks have made a freaking.
I do like to look at those guys. They're great.
I'm sure you do, man. You said that in a very creepy way too.
Yeah.
But
the Seahawks fan, Kevin's a Niners fan. We don't have to say much more about it.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I'm giving you credit how the Seahawks have did great.
You guys have brought up your Niners and your Seahawks. I have to say,
you guys drafted Chad Pennington. You were happy about that?
That's what I have to talk about. I was like internally laughing when they were playing the game, the big game, and Chad Pennington was like, "We would have won the game if I would have thrown so many picks." I was like, "And you're a Jet."
Do you know what quarterback was available in that very same draft?
Dan Marino. No.
2001?
No.
Tom Brady.
We would have never picked him.
Yeah.
Nobody did.
The Brady six
quarterbacks.
The Brady six, which is another good 30 for 30.
It's not 30 for 30. It's NFL film special. It's
Tom
literally
Brady was the same year as Chad Pennington?
Yeah.
I can name all six guys.
It's because there was a 49er dude that was picked second.
Giovanni.
I thought he was.
Six guys.
I thought he was a year after.
I'll give you the narration. In the 2001 NFL draft. No, I'm just kidding. No, the six guys that were taken were Chad Pennington was first.
Right.
Giovanni Carmassi was second.
T. Martin.
T. Martin went fourth.
With four.
Chris Redmond went third. Spurgeon Wynn went fifth. And sixth was Mark Bulger.
Yeah.
And then Brady went seventh.
And out of all those,
quarterbacks, seventh quarterback.
I would say out of all those, Bulger had a respectable career, especially on the Rams
But the difference too is that when you talk, and again we're tangent, and then we'll come right back.
Yeah.
When you talk about with the Jets needed, like they were trying to get a quarterback that was ready. They thought to play now. Tom Brady got drafted and he sat the bench.
Well, nobody knew Brady. I mean, Brady was the ultimate.
Right. No one knew, but they had time to form him to exactly what they wanted him to be.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
Absolutely. So so he gets drafted 21st. And I love that part in the doc. It definitely that got me a little choked up when he talks about how thankful his mom was. She's sitting there with the Bible.
I love him.
I know, right? He's the greatest.
And not to segue off, but don't you like a lot of these stories? Their mothers are so. No, I'm just saying, and maybe you won't like it, but they always just seem to be very, Christian based, faith based. They're always praying for their boys and things of that sort. And that's just a Southern mentality,
Something that came to mind for me.
But that contradicts the Southern mentality of also where it's so racist and everything.
I 100% agree.
So.
Well, I mean, you can smile and say.
Hey, the KKK was a Catholic organization, technically.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when we do these docs. It always ends up coming back to race. I think it's just the nature of the beast because I think they do stories that largely appeal to people, stories that happened in like the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s because their audience.
That appeal to us, like you said, because it's current, it's relatable.
And the racial change happening in the 90s. But anyway, one thing I thought about, so I'm like a newer sports fan overall. I mean, at this point, I've been pretty passionate about sports for about 6 years, but I didn't grow up a sports fan. You guys know this about me. I kind of adopted it and then I just went head first. But
what did you do?
It's a combination of just I started to find football really fascinating at first. Then I had a roommate, and he was a Seahawks fan. I'm from Seattle, so I played fantasy one year.
No, I mean, what did you like? How did you spend your time?
I was a big nerd. I had a bowl cut. I have 6,000 comic books in Seattle. I wanted to be a comic book
You
artist.
a nerd?
When I was a kid.
I can never see that.
That was my goal in life, was to be I had blue hair when I was 12. But anyway, so
where is that baby pic?
I have some good pictures to show you. So one thing that I think is really funny and really interesting, and I actually, this would be the only knock on this documentary for me, would be this. So my roommate played college football at Wheaton. It was a D3 school, and they were like the best D3 school. So he was like a pretty prestigious program. It's like Christian Harvard, basically. And he's a huge sports fan. He's been a lifelong athlete, ran like a 4.41, was super quick. So I always ask him, because he watches basketball and football, I'll say when a guy's in the pros, I'll be like, do you remember such and such? Sure. Was he good in college? Now, I stopped asking this question because the answer was yes every single time. The reason being, obviously, if you're in the pros, you were, of course, insane in college. You were not just good in college. You were probably the best player in the state or one of the best players in the state growing up. Yeah. And then you were the best player on your college team, probably, if not one of them. And then, you know what I mean? Now you're an NFL player and maybe you're just average in the NFL or the NBA, but you were absolutely bonkers. Because I didn't play sports growing up, this is not a phenomenon that I was really particularly used to. The stuff with Moss at Marshall and setting the records and having like a great college career, I couldn't help myself watching it and thinking, I almost don't need this. I know that he was amazing. Everybody knows that every college athlete that makes the NFL for the most part is amazing, and just
But that wasn't the point. The point was he was doing, for me, the point was that he was doing all that in high school.
Right.
And all this racism was happening, and it derailed him from his path.
So it was like he was able to do it successfully.
Yeah, I think it's just the fact that he was able to.
It wasn't like, I mean, I had a record at my high school. You know what I mean? Like, most good athletes do something that, and it's not, has nothing to pertain with where I am now in the world, and I don't think it matters to where he was. I think, like you're saying, it is kind of, it's a known that would probably happen, but it was because that's where he was excelling. He still got pinpointed, and because he was the superstar and people knew him publicly, because in high school you get written up. Every softball game I played, you got written up in the paper. Like, people know you, so when there's an instance like a fight and you're involved, because they know who you are, you're blamed. And I feel like that's kind of why they were trying to.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're the star and you're associated with it, your name is going to be the one that goes down on it versus everybody else. Even nowadays, I thought it was funny, not to go off subject, but if you remember during the offseason with all the NFL arrests, there was a particular scenario that happened in Miami where Colin Kaepernick and 3 other guys were arrested for this alleged, I guess, I don't know, sexual assault.
Yeah. Right.
Colin Kaepernick was really the only name that was in there. Now, there was like 4 other football players, but because they weren't as known as Colin Kaepernick, he was the one that was associated with. So I think that kind of goes back to...
Yeah, I think they were just setting it up to why he was pinpointed.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily mean that him being good in college or showing some of that footage was unnecessary. This is sort of the same... I don't want to just come in here and do these 30 for 30s and praise them left, right, and center, because they're great stories. Right. This is the same thing I said about Sonny Vaccaro and trying to pose the question of how relevant was the story, how relevant was really just stories about Nike shoes. It's the same thing with me for this, where I'm sort of like, the thing I found most interesting was not him being really good at football. That goes without saying. I mean, you see the footage. It was like sort of like the statistics and the Pennington being like, he was this great receiver, and he just made all of our quarterbacks look stupid. It's like, well, of course he did. He's Randy Moss. Like, I don't necessarily need that. They didn't harp on it, but something I did want to point out. because we're sort of wrapping up here, is we get to the wrap up, the post stuff where he gets drafted and he goes on record and he says, Rand University, and it shows him at the camp, and it shows his buddies, hanging out with him back in Rand when he goes back to visit. I wanted to talk really quickly about Marques De Zeeuw, the director of this. So this is his directorial debut. It's the first thing he directed.
He did a great job too.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Younger guy. He's produced 8 of the last, since 2014, 8 30 for 30s. So he's a big production guy. He's behind a lot of these now. He also produced, I think, 8 or 9 of the shorts.
Yeah.
So he's heavily involved in making these things. I hope he directs more.
Yeah.
I really think that this was one of the best ones.
Yeah, I feel like too they really got something here with these 30 for 30s, and I'm almost sad that not as many people watch them. That they're only on ESPN.
Yeah, I mean,
You know what I mean? I get it.
Every single one's on Netflix.
Right, but I mean, it's not like primetime television. You kind of have to seek it out.
Right.
Not a normal.
But
not
I mean,
every normal sports fan would know.
Sure.
To go, if it was on a Sunday night or something after a football game on NBC or something, I feel like more people would watch it, and so many more people would enjoy this. I'm almost sad that everyone doesn't get to enjoy it because they're so good.
It's been more successful than you think, and it's definitely caught on. Do you know who was behind these things? Do you know who the major brain behind this whole idea was?
Kris Jenner.
Mr. Bill Simmons, who is no longer with ESPN, who was just fired.
Recently, yeah.
Wow.
As of the last 2 weeks. Grantland.com and 30 for 30 were both his brainchild. He's no longer at ESPN. I hope it works out without Bill Simmons, because those are the 2 properties that I'm the most excited about.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I read something too that the next batch of these are going to be series for series. I mean, 30 for 30 series or 30 for 34.
Not a bad
it's going
idea.
to change the name slightly.
Yeah. So that pretty much, unless do you guys have any thoughts on the wrap up? I mean, just there's that final shot where Singleton's talking. It's really sad.
No, I mean, I think overall, just my final thoughts and my wrap up of this is, I think part of the reason it was done, I know we were talking about that, was just showing the obstacles that he overcame.
Yeah.
And just showed his perseverance and the fact that, through it all, God, whether, you want to say God, the universe, had a plan for his life. He was destined to be where he was going to go, regardless of what he went through, what setbacks he had. He ended up where he was supposed to be, and I just think that the whole story was remarkable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it was a really good 30 for 32, and it's interesting how much it still pertains, but also how much has changed, and I think they did a really good job of showing that.
Yeah.
And I love Randy Moss.
Absolutely, and I
love Randy.
I will say, of the 3 greatest receivers of all time, Kevin and I have interviewed Terrell Owens on one of these shows.
Yeah.
He was a treat and awesome to talk to. I hope we get to interview Randy Moss someday. I would
Yes.
love to interview Randy Moss.
I just want to do
give you a hug.
my Randy Moss impersonation for you if you're here, Randy. Now, I think you want
Are you trying to sound like him?
It actually sounded more like Forrest Gump.
You sound
but,
terrible.
Yeah, that
Hey,
was
Maori. Actually, the one thing
All right, let's wrap it up.
Nate Burleson.
I was going to just say a quick plug. We had Nate Burleson on Branded Athlete a little while back, and he told an amazing story about a Randy Moss catch in Vikings
God.
practice. It's probably one of my favorite moments I've ever done as a host. Is just listen. I mean, I'm sitting there with my jaw dropped. I'm just in awe and loving it.
Right.
It's if you Branded Athlete, Nate Burleson. I want to say it's something like 45 or 50 minutes into the episode.
I think it's our 3rd episode or 2nd episode.
Yeah, look it up. It's a great story. It'll blow your mind. So anyway, I am Ben Bateman. Thank you for watching the 30 for 30 wrap-up of Rand University on AfterBuzz TV, your online broadcast network dedicated to bring you after shows for your favorite TV shows. For every good TV show, there's a better after show. Steph Z, where can they find you?
You guys can find me on all social media platforms at IAMSTEFZ.
And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at HeyKevinJohn or on my website, www.itskevinjohn.com. We'll see.
You guys can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter, Instagram, and very occasionally Periscope. We'll
And
see
he
you
has
soon.
great suits.
Great suits.
Great suits.
Thank you, Kevin. See you guys soon.
All right.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.